I love you, I love you.
कोई नहीं है बस तुम हो साथ कहनी थी तुमसे जो दिल की बात कोई नहीं है बस तुम हो साथ कहनी थी तुमसे जो दिल की बात लो आज मैं कहती हूँ I love you I love you I love you
सावन का महीना पवन करे शोर
सावन का महीना पवन करे शोर
पवन करे शोर
पवन करे शोर
अरे बाबा शोर नहीं शोर शोर शोर
पवन करे शोर
हाँ जिया रे झूमे ऐसे जैसे बन माना छे मोर
प्यार हुआ इकरार हुआ है प्यार से फिर क्यों डरता है दिल प्यार हुआ इकरार हुआ है प्यार से फिर क्यों डरता है दिल
कहता है दिल रास्ता मुश्किल मालूम नहीं है कहाँ मंजिल कहता है दिल रास्ता मुश्किल मालूम नहीं है कहाँ मंजिल
प्यार हुआ इकरार हुआ है प्यार से फिर क्यों डरता है दिल
कहता है दिल रास्ता मुश्किल मालूम नहीं है कहाँ मंजिल
प्यार हुआ इकरार हुआ है प्यार से फिर क्यों डरता है दिल
Hello and good afternoon, Tapra, or a very good morning to you, Kareem. Welcome to the keynote session for Tapra 2021. My name is Prarthana Purkayastha, and I'm Senior Lecturer in the Department of Drama, Theatre and Dance at Royal Holloway, University of London. I'm delighted to be the chair and respondent for Kareem Khubchandani's keynote lecture today, and I've already gone to a very happy place with those clips, which are from some of the most iconic Bollywood films that I grew up with. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here with our keynote speaker today. A quick description for any blind or partially sighted audience members. I'm a South Asian woman who grew up in India. I have brown skin, brown eyes, long black hair peppered with gray. I'm wearing dark brown rimmed glasses, long silver earrings and a nose pin, and I'm in a black dress. Before we move on to other things, Kareem, would you like to jump in and offer an audio description of yourself today?
Yeah, hi. My name is Kareem Khubchandani. I use any pronouns. I am a brown-skinned South Asian person with salt and pepper hair and beard. I'm wearing holographic round earrings and pink eyeliner with a gold and pink mesh shirt.
Thanks, Kareem. So before we get to the exciting stuff, please allow me to bore you with some housekeeping details. This session today is going to be around 55 minutes long, with a conversation between Kareem and myself taking up the first 25 minutes or so. This will be followed by a 30-minute Q&A with the audience. Please, may I urge the audience to keep any noise-making devices in the room on silent, if possible, even though you will be on mute for the first half of the session. Hide your children, pets, and lovers in the cupboard. For the Q&A, please use the hand raise function to ask a question and unmute yourself when it's your turn. Be polite. You can also leave a question or comment in the chat if your microphone or video isn't working, or if that's your preferred format for asking a question. Please note that we have live captions available for those who need it, and the session is being recorded and may be publicly available following the conference. So you should have seen Kareem's keynote video, which was uploaded by Tapra in advance of this session. If you haven't seen this, please go see it whenever you can after this session. But Kareem and I will try to offer some context to begin with, so hopefully you'll settle right in. So it's an absolute honor and joy to introduce one of my favorite colleagues in the field, the brilliant and inimitable Kareem Khubchandani. So Kareem, please allow me a minute to sing your praises for a bit. Kareem Khubchandani is the Mellon Bridge Assistant Professor in Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Tufts University. He's the author of Ishtail, Accenting Gay Indian Nightlife, published by University of Michigan Press in 2020, which won the 2021 Association for Theatre and Higher Education, or ATHA, Outstanding Book Award, and the 2019 CLAGS Center for the LGBTQ Studies Fellowship. Kareem is also co-editor of Queer Nightlife, also coming out with University of Michigan Press 2021, and curator of criticalantistudies.com. His writings have appeared in Scholar and Feminist Online, in Transgender Studies Quarterly, Samaj South Asia, Journal of Asian American Studies, and the Velvet Light Trap. Professor Gayatri Gopinath describes Kareem's book Ishtail as a deeply moving, eloquent testament to the laborious pleasures and pleasurable labors of queer world-making practices. I personally have taught Ishtail to my students, and they absolutely adored it and took so much away from this. And I urge everyone to get the book and read it and teach it if you can. So without any further ado, Kareem, welcome.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you to you for that lovely introduction, and also to Roberta and to Joe for the kind of care they've put into bringing me here. This has been really exciting. I'm seeing faces of some of my favorite people in the world of theater and performance studies up here on the screen. So I just feel really happy to be in your company and in everyone else's company too.
Great. So the first question for you, Kareem, is for those guys and folks and wonderful people in the room who haven't had the chance to see your video, perhaps could you just tell us a little bit more about the relationship between Kareem Khubchandani and your drag queen persona, Lahore Vajistan? Why did you choose the name Lahore Vajistan? What does Lahore Vajistan do, or what does she undo when it comes to researching and teaching performance?
Yeah, so I got in drag as a one-time gig for a fundraiser in Chicago when I was about 25 years old. But that fundraiser kept happening, and I kept performing. And I chose the name, and that sort of grew into my field site and became part of my life and my research and performance. And I didn't necessarily have a sustained performance practice before that. But being in drag has done or actually I'll say about the name Lahore Vajistan, Lahore gesturing to Lahore in Pakistan, and Vajistan being a formulation of the subcontinent that is more expansive than just Pakistan or Hindustan, but really thinking about all the other stans, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, just really define the kind of colonial geographies that shape that area. And the reason that's important to me is that my family is originally from Pakistan. We're Sindhi. We had, my family is also from a migrant community. So we were traveling and outside of the subcontinent well before partition, but we're not able to return to Sindh in Pakistan after. So for me, Vajistan is capturing the kind of capaciousness of migration and extended borders, or lack of borders, if you will, that have shaped my life and my becoming, and gesture to sexuality and sexual politics at the same time. And performing in drag in nightclubs, in my field sites, and in the classroom, one has done a lot for me. Right, and has made me think through the kinds of femininities I've had to leave behind in order to be a respectable professorial subject, to feel like to not feel like an imposter in the academy, and to feel like a, especially as a graduate student, you dress up to go to conferences, but the way you dress up is shirt, pant, tie, right? And so Lahore has taught me a lot about my own sort of the way I bring myself into my professional worlds. But it's also, making performances that live online or performing in the club has given me a kind of circulation, such that people know who I am before I ask them for an interview. And when they want to talk to me, they want to talk to me about sex and dress, and so the kind of data I get in my interviews is shaped by what people know about Lahore. And in my classroom, when I teach as Lahore, I think it forces my students to think of my body, think of myself very differently, to encounter me in ways. It defamiliarizes their relationship with me and who they think they're learning from, and I think that has been especially productive.
Right. And would you say that Lahore also kind of provided, with that very important issue of this access to the ethnographic site that you were talking about, and you mentioned that in your talk as well, because you're really interested in the nighttime economy, and you also talk about in your lecture about, there's a wonderful sentence that you say, you learned about the nightlife by working in it, and that your project is an ethnography of the nightlife. But you're also interested in how drag queens queer those very spaces. And so Lahore then also becomes an ethnographic tool in offering you access to these spaces which otherwise would remain underground or invisible or
And
not accessible to other
and
scholars.
it's not just about what's invisible, but it extended the kind of it reoriented and extended the time of the nightclub. So just getting there early to set up, to work the door, to get ready there, I got to see how barbacks and bartenders are actually prepping the space. They're fetching DVDs to put in the player to show on the screen. There are all these things that are happening that I would never see otherwise. Sorry, there's a very large truck going by. So that's one thing. The other is, because I was up on the stage during the performance as opposed to being an audience member, I got to see audience members as performers, right? They were doing as much of a show as I was. And when you're down amongst them, you don't see you see with a different vantage point. So being up there, literally the physical reorientation of my position as an ethnographer allowed me to see much more the way people wanted to tip, how they were sort of moving through the crowd to just hand me a dollar bill was actually told me a lot about what songs mobilized them, the kinds of expressions and masculinity they performed in their body in order to tip. In any other circumstances, I would have written the drag queen, right? That other figure, but now that was me. And so that reorientation happened.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Let's move from this discussion then of your embodied practice straight into the way in which you analyze choreography as well. So your book kind of places your body very centrally within this ethnographic project of the nighttime economy, but at the same time, it brings fantastic analysis of choreography and performance from films, and particularly mobilizes the figure of the diva in very useful and powerful ways. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the indebtedness that perhaps this kind of choreographic analysis or the analysis of film, the indebtedness that it might have to feminist and queer performance and to feminist and queer theory. So as an example, I particularly thought in your book, Ishtail, about this very striking analysis of sequences from Bollywood cinema, particularly the 1980s diva Sridevi and the 1990s iconic diva Madhuri Dixit and their dance numbers. So for example, when you discuss Madhuri's dance number, Choli ke piche kya hai, which is loosely translated as what's behind the blouse and what's underneath the veil. Or Sridevi's cult hit, Main Teri Dushman, I'm Your Enemy, from the film Nagina. You you describe these moments as these choreographic moments as moments where women and their bodies escape a particular heteronormative patriarchal order, even if such order is restored once the song or the dance number comes to an end, right? And I found that really particularly exciting. And I just thought that for a really long time, feminists found these choreographies quite troubling, a particularly sort of liberal progressive feminist gaze, driven by a very Western feminist liberal project, found these divas and their choreographies, their heaving busts and their gyrating midriffs quite problematic, because they saw these as demeaning, derogatory. They presented women and their bodies to this particular gaze as sexually objectified, to a very largely heteronormative gaze. But you offer a very different reading of those very same choreographies which have troubled feminists in the 1980s and 90s. Like growing up in India, I would actually have feminist female choreographers go, oh, commercial choreographies, you know, they're so cheap and vulgar. But Lahore absolutely embraces the cheap and the vulgar. And you find moments of emancipation and liberation within those cheap and vulgar moments in the films and in the choreographies. So I just wondered whether you could talk to us and our audience a little bit about this troubling of that gaze. So the gaze and the reading that you offer troubles that view of dancing women on screen simply as eroticized. So can you bring out that tension a little bit between a kind of traditional feminist view or gaze of these excessive choreographies and a queer reading of those very same choreographies, which kind of reclaims a space of liberation and freedom?
Yeah, that's that's really a lovely question, and I'll think about two theorists who helped me get at that, and one is a queer theorist, which is Gayatri Gopinath, who talks about in her essay Queer Bollywood. She says, you know, the film narrative is always going to be heteronormative, and that our queer pleasures can be found in the interstices, right? So looking at not even the whole song, right, but just those moments, I think, are really productive. Those moments in which the performer exceeds the narrative, exceeds the kinds of disciplinary forces to use their body in their own way. And we see, especially in Sridevi and Madhuri Dixit, that even though they're of course choreographed, there's something that they're able to do with their bodies. They're actually very skilled and talented performers who are activating their bodies in really phenomenal ways, and it's contagious. And this is the second part, you know, where I think about Stacey Wolf's argument that the American musical lends itself to queerness because it gives audiences more than narrative. She says that the sound, you know, pulsating in your body, the foot tapping even, is this other resource that extends beyond this idea of the head. Sure, there's a heteronormative happy ending at the end, but that's not the only place where we can find identification and pleasure. There's other ways that performance sits in the body that invite it. She says it's just more opportunities to enter the sphere of the performance, right? And so with that, you know, I'm really interested, or what happens for me in the field is that there's a contagiousness to performance. So there's a moment in the nightclub where Choli Ke Piche comes on and everybody starts pulsing their breasts, right? And I'm with someone who, a young South Asian non-binary person who had not been in that environment, and they're like, teach me, mother, show me what they're doing, right? But that kind of contagiousness of movement that Madhuri has gifted us, and I think is really important, that it activates community. And I think if we're only using a literary lens to say the film does this, right, and it lives in its own universe, I think we're forgetting that it actually has the potential to invigorate bodies. And then there's another moment in which the sound of a snake charmer's flute comes on, and people in the club start moving together. And I think that contagiousness is really important. So I think what I want to show you maybe is how that gesture moves through film, but also how it moves through the club.
Yeah,
Can I share screen for a second?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Go for it.
Okay, let's do some tech. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. Four men, form a small circle. They lift their shirts up to expose their twinkish stomachs, flat but soft. The bottoms of their t-shirts are held in their teeth, and each has a cupped hand above his head, broken at the wrist, the cobra's head. They body roll for each other, chest, stomach, hips, chest, stomach, hips. Zubair, who occasionally helps to organize these parties and bring the younger hip crowd, is just beside them. His stance is wide as he shifts the weight of his hips and point of his cowboy boots from left to right. Both his hands are over his head, overlapping and cupped, the cobra's head. Farther away from me, a skinny boy dances for his partner, one leg raised off the ground, one arm extended above his head, wrist bent. His entire body is the cobra. The dance floor is full of snakes, cobras charmed by the DJ's track. So just this, all this constantly replicated movement shows up in the nightclub and activates a world of desire too, right? It's not foreclosed by its weirdness or silliness or its sort of association with the 1980s,
Yeah.
but is really something that is in the present and is in the body. And I think that when we forget to follow the gesture, even beyond the screen, I think we fix agency in a sort of a very limited way, and that's sort of some of what I'm trying to do in the book, in that chapter on Madhuri and Sridevi.
Yeah, absolutely. And therein lies the problem with just an ocular centric approach to performance, right? Because it completely denies the agency of bodies, of sensation, of the actual lived sensations that course through the body as you fan your wrists or bend them or cup them in a cobra gesture and gyrate. Yeah. Thank you for showing that clip. I just want to jump from that then, because you mentioned Gayatri Gopinath and Stacey Wolf as inspirations for thinking about the power of these gestures and the power of this moment of excess. And I think perhaps those of our colleagues in the room who are interested in musical theatre, who might be interested in studying those moments of excesses in the musical theatre format, might also find this quite useful. But I want us to kind of move to perhaps the indebtedness that you might have to a legacy of queer theory. So Gayatri Gopinath is one of those scholars, but I'm also particularly thinking about the ways in which queer theories really animated the field of performance and theatre studies generally. And our colleagues in the US have made such amazing contributions to the field. And I'm particularly thinking about queer colleagues of color. So the legacy of Jose Esteban Munoz comes to mind through the works such as Disidentifications or Cruising Utopia. Joshua Chambers Letson's work comes to mind, After the Party. Jack Halberstam, Elizabeth Freeman's talked about queer time and queer place. And then, of course, there's Madison Moore as well recently also talked about the fabulous. So there's something in the air, in the atmosphere about queerness and how it animates and mobilizes really important questions within the theatre and performance studies field about citizenship and modes of belonging and race and desire. So I just wondered whether you could tell us a little bit more about your intellectual divas, as it were. So apart from Madhuri and Sridevi, who you followed as a young boy and who we've all followed, who are your intellectual divas whose works really shaped your thinking?
I love thinking about them as intellectual divas. I think it's a great framing. The person I'll start with is someone who wrote a book called Global Divas, Martin Manalansan, who's a Filipino scholar writing about how queer, effeminate Filipino migrants negotiate urban America, and specifically New York. But he has this chapter on a drag show in which Catholic symbols and garments and traditions are reinvented into queer possibility, and his attention to how dress and style are remobilized for pleasure and to stage, not with pleasure and critique. So to stage BDSM, to stage those who have been lost to HIV, it really blew my mind to think that this, and he's an anthropologist, but it's this chapter on this drag pageant that really moved me to think about what's possible even inside of the heteronormative frame or inside of the religious conservative frame or any of those things. So Martin is definitely, Global Divas is definitely one of my diva books. The other, of course, is Jose Esteban Munoz's Disidentifications. And one of the reasons I really love that book is, sure, it makes lots of contributions, but the one that is so important is that he helps us understand that performance is a mode of survival, right? And I think our conversations about survival are often about the psyche and the kinds of mental games we use to negotiate the kinds of pressures placed on minoritarian people. And he's saying, no, actually performance is this way of mediating the expectations of public discourse and identity. And we need to not attach ourselves to this idea that the psyche is the only way in which we are real, but that performance is this way of refusing the expectations of what other people think is real about you. And I just think it's really smart, really beautiful. And if we don't, and it brings really high stakes to performance for queers of color. Not an American scholar, but Sarah Ahmed, I think, has given American queer scholarship so much, but in relation to performance, she's the idea of orientation, right? She's giving us an actual, real, embodied logic to think with how we cathect to modes of desire and aspiration, and I think that we see a lot of performance scholars mobilizing her philosophical queer study, and I think that that's really important. And then the last is my own PhD advisor, E. Patrick Johnson, who wrote a book called Appropriating Blackness. And in that book, he's asking who has the right to perform Blackness, and who is and how is the appropriation debate actually policing other Black folks, specifically queer and trans Black folks who are being told they're not Black enough because they are not straight enough, right? And so he uses performance as this way of uplifting queer modes of knowing, including an incredible chapter called Everything I Know About Queer Theory I Learned from My Grandmother. On the chapter is called Queer Studies. And I think that that's actually really valuable to think about where the availability of queer theory everywhere, right? And performance gives us that. Performance gives us permission to look for theory in places that are not the text. And so his ability to do that. And the last thing I'll say is I think queer and trans studies always needs performance studies because we're always talking about the body, right? And the way we desire and the way we move and the way we bring our bodies into visibility or opacity so that they become desirable and are able to enter community, etc. So I think queer and trans studies needs performance studies and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm aware that we're almost at time, and I just can't figure out how that's happened because I've literally spent 5 seconds with you, and I have so much more to ask you, but I can't let you go and I can't go to the audience without asking you about your two more recent projects. The first is on aunties and ontology, and the second is on decolonized drag. So I just wondered whether I could combine those two in a final question to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about aunties as a liminal peripheral figure, and perhaps particularly your work within British Asian performance formats? Like aunties have always featured so heavily in British Asian comedy, for instance. But I wondered whether you wanted to talk to that a little bit about how you're reclaiming the figure of the auntie in performance. And also, if you could finish with perhaps a few thoughts on decolonizing drag, and particularly your critiques of the global phenomenon that is RuPaul drag and the particular ways in which it includes as well as excludes or occludes particular bodies.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with that and lead into aunties.
Okay, sure.
But there's this moment where I had my students go and watch Lahore perform, and one of them comes back and says, after your performance, I was clapping and someone put his hands over mine and said, don't clap for them, they're not real drag queens. But this sent me into imposter syndrome mode, but asked me, what am I doing that is not real drag? And some of it was to say, well, where is this person coming from? What are they judging? But the other is to really take stock of my drag and realize that it is very much anti-drag, right? I'm wearing saris. I'm interested in gaudy aesthetics that are not necessarily those of, I'm not invoking 1940s Hollywood. My gaudy aesthetics don't come from disco, or don't come from US disco. They come from a Bollywood disco, right? So really thinking about the antiness of my drag is one, brought out this critique of, well, what is mainstream drag and how has it been shaped, and how has it created a mainstream drag really over the last 12 years being modeled by RuPaul and RuPaul's Drag Race and the kinds of expensive aesthetics she's requiring people to perform, and her production company. So that's the work of decolonized drag, is to really open up access and not let other people feel that kind of imposter syndrome and say, actually, I'm allowed to perform the way my people, whatever that looks like, perform, and that's still drag as well. It doesn't have to lean into white Western aesthetics and even conceptions of gender and what gender crossing is in order to be drag. So that's decolonized drag. But this, as I become auntie, as a drag queen, I just started seeing aunties everywhere and realized that they're constantly, I guess, maligned, right? We have this book called Trust No Auntie,
Right.
by Canadian Pakistani writer and illustrator Maria Kammer. And there's so much like negative auntie sentiment, and aunties get to embody the sort of disciplinary upper caste Indian or South Asian respectable figure, but there's so many other, and that's sort of the public discourse about them. They're the ones who are surveilling you. They're the ones who, and they're liminal in that they're just outside the home, right? So they can surveil, but they also might open up. And that's what I think is really exciting about them. And someone who's obsessed with aunties, I think more than I am, is Meera Syal, British Asian actress. And so she has, Life is Not All Ha Ha He He, in which they're just aunties everywhere, and the main figures are worried about becoming aunties. And there's Anita and Me, in which the young person can't help but like listen to her aunties gossiping and gossiping about partition. And in the sitcom Beautiful People, she plays a live-in South Asian blind auntie to a working class white family. And I'm just going to play this clip and explain to you what I think she does in terms of liminality that I think is really interesting.
And as the cold winds of partition blew across the tundra, Daddy ran towards the helicopter and I ran after him, my bare feet burning on all the chili peppers on the ground. Don't leave me, Daddy, I cried. I am but a poor and lowly blind girl. How will I cope in this newly divided land?
Hang on. You once told me you were born in Bushy.
Oh, I was on a roll then.
Bushy by name, bushy by nature. Anyway, Simon, actually, although you call her your Auntie Hayley, she's not actually your real auntie. So what's she doing in your family tree?
Oh, no, we're allowed extended family.
So, I mean, Mira is constantly bringing up partition, but I think that, she uses auntie to live in this in between of like, what if the nations weren't divided? What if we didn't think about Pakistan and India differently? And why? And I think it's interesting that she uses her diasporic liminality to perform, and her auntie liminality to live in that in between, to ask and open up questions of nationalism that I think she feels she still holds, right? And there's also clips from Goodness Gracious Me in which she's talking about the pleasures of colonial violence. She's playing this old character, so I think she just does some interesting work bringing sexuality and colonial violence together. And she uses the auntie and she uses this aging South Asian liminal figure to do that kind of work. And then, there's there's so many more ways to think about her auntiness, but her living with this white family, I think is also really interesting, and performing as a blind figure who has a dog named Mummy. So she is the auntie and dog, and her seeing eye dog is Mummy, and so there are ways in which I think the show are playing with auntiness in really interesting ways.
Thank you so much, Kareem, for that fantastic clip and that wonderful explication. And I think, all of us wish you so much luck with your new project, Ontologies, and we can't wait to see that in print whenever that's finished. But I'm aware of time, and I've taken up too much time selfishly, but that comes with chair's privilege, I suppose. So let me just give over the room to other respondents, colleagues. If you have questions, please, now is the time to ask Kareem. I think Jerry has a hand up, if I'm not mistaken. Jerry, are you here? Hi, Jerry.
I am. Hello. Hi. Hi, Kareem. Thank you so much for that. I really enjoyed it. I was in touch with you earlier about maybe contributing to your special issue on critical auntie studies, which is one of my now new favorite things, because I've been looking a lot at representations of these auntie figures in British theatre and film, as you were talking about with people like Mira. And, looking at these representations, they can often be very misogynist in how they see these women and how they're represented and how they're talked about by other characters. But I was talking with Suman Butcher, who worked with Tamasha Theatre, and she was saying, well, yes, but then the other side of this is that they can also be in the position of the joker, because they're in such a position of alterity that they are the ones who can step back and make comment on the action, that they're outside society and outside in so many ways. And I was wondering if that, relating to Gopinath's idea of queer and diaspora as a queer space and that liminal you were talking about, does that then also come into how you create your character in drag, and her positioning, as well as being in that sort of in-between space of being able to comment in a way because of that idea of the auntie figure?
Yeah, it is amazing how much I don't have to do a lot of work. The second I say my pronouns are she, her, and auntie, you get a reaction from the audience, and there's this pleasure and discomfort and in having an auntie in the room. And I was in London performing at this very Gen Z queer henna night. These young folks were saying, well, if we don't get to have mehndi parties, we're going to have our own henna night. And it was very sweet. And there was before I went on, there were all these like, there was at least 2 poetry pieces about aunties and their disciplinary voices. And then I come up there and I'm like, well, the auntie's in the room, and there was laughter and discomfort. And then, 20 seconds later, this auntie is performing to Sheila Ki Javani, Rolling on the Ground. But I was definitely the oldest person in the room as well. So I think just the, naming the auntie and not even developing, apart from character development, does a lot of work to invoke generational difference, stereotypes, misogynistic stereotypes that are very easy to break by rolling on the ground 10 seconds later, right? So by calling myself auntie and breaking that at the same time, I think that is fun, it's easy, it's exciting. But then there are also things that I'm actually invested in that I find very difficult, which, you know, aunties are very good at tying saris, and I'm not, and I want to be, right? I want access to that aesthetic excellence. And that's knowledge that isn't given to folks like me. And so there's something very personal there as well, that I'm very rarely invited into, right? And I think that that's there's some auntie work that auntie aesthetics I'm trying to embody that I wish I had a longer training in. I wish I had actual mentors to invite me into those kinds of spaces. I hope that answers that.
Thanks, Jerry, for that question. And I also thought, Kareem, in your TED talk, you talked really beautifully about auntie work in activism. For instance, the aunties who fed the protesters who came out in their thousands on the streets of New Delhi in India to protest against the Citizenship Amendment Act. And it's aunties as forgotten heroes, and the kind of invisible labor that they offer and the support and nourishment that they offer that is often forgotten. And I thought that was a really insightful thing to bring in. So thank you for that. Any more questions apart from Jerry? Can I, Joe, are you checking the chat to see if
I am keeping an eye on the chat. Yeah, I can't see any at the moment, so I'll let you know if anything comes in.
So does anyone else want to jump in? I'm wondering, Kareem, while people are formulating a question or thinking about it, could you then talk about some of your activism work as well? Because in your opening section in your uploaded keynote, you did talk about sex work, and I know that you have been thinking about sex and sex work and illicit nighttime economies for a while. That's something that you've also engaged with. So I just wondered whether the role of activism in performance also shapes and curates the performances that you produce and the scholarship that you produce and then your work as a pedagogue that you move into. So what role does activism play, political activism play?
So when I started doing research in Bangalore in particular, there was a way that I was called upon as a US academic, but also as a performer, to participate in public activism, especially LGBTQ activism. And it was very much there that I was amazed and fascinated by the integration of sex work activism into LGBTQ activism, specifically through NGOs working with hijras and kotis. So third gender folks who embody genders other than Western notions of male and female. Koti often aligning with effeminate men, and hijra trans feminine folks. But there I was asked to curate events and to speak at events and to participate. But it was being a public performance figure. They were like, oh, you know how to dance? You should choreograph for us. You should curate this whole festival. I mean, I had never lived in Bangalore, and 2 months in, I'm being asked to curate a whole event as part of their week-long Pride celebrations. But I think that comes with the role of auntie, that comes with the role of being a drag queen, that comes with the role of being an academic. And so from then onwards, I was showing up to protests and especially around decriminalizing sodomy, but also the Karnataka Police Act that specifically polices hijras and their loitering and
Right.
therefore their sex work, right? Their availability to occupy public space. And because I was showing up in those spaces, I was then invited to be in a play about the Karnataka Police Act, where I played a policeman,
Mm.
which was really a strange role, for me to embody. But they're like, no, we got the costume, we're stuffing an even bigger pot belly into you, and you're gonna be the policeman. And they asked me to. They were training me in the kind of Bangalore Kannada accent, saying you have to say you're over smart, right? So as I think about accents, the way that the policeman speaks was being taught to me by these activists who wanted me to be in their play as well. So to me, performance activism and scholarship are always sort of making each other, and that I worked with the writers of that play to write a short essay about it as well. That's in Transgender Studies Quarterly.
Right, fantastic. Thank you for that. I think there are some questions appearing in the chat, right? So
Yep, they've got quite a few. So have you got access to those, Prarthana?
I do. Should we begin with Irini, Joe?
Yep, that's the
Is that
first
the
one.
first
Yeah.
one? Okay. So Irini is asking, thanks so much, Kareem. I loved your keynote and the discussion here. You said at some point in your keynote that nightlife is where we practice our politics, not where we go to avoid it. Are there any examples of good practice or conceptual tips as to how to do that best?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the ways that my book works is to think about how nightlife or a nightlife venue has set itself up discursively. That means starting with everything from the invitation to where it is held, to what is hanging on the walls, what the music is playing. So even before bodies are activating the space, how do we think about what this space and environment is? And then asking, well, what permission have we given to people to perform in that space? Is there a dance floor area so people know where to go, right? And how are we creating spaces in which people of different genders feel comfortable in different spaces? And is that what we want, or do we want more things? So one is asking, what do we want out of a nightlife event or out of a nightlife space? But methodologically, I think about like what all is set up to say, here are the politics of this space. And then when people enter, how do they engage with that? So the final chapter of the book is about nightlife as curation and thinking about what are the ways we do that. So if we're thinking about best practices, making sure that there are opportunities for people who don't drink to access nightlife. And there's a UK-based party by queer and trans folks of color called Misery that does that. Or having daytime events in which folks who can't stay up at night can go. Having signage on the bathrooms and even at the front of the space that say what best practices are, such as like, if you find yourself in conflict, please reach out to the door person or talk to the DJ or the DJ's assistant, right? Pointing people to where to go, because these are unpredictable spaces. And what can we do to protect those who are most vulnerable in them? So I'm not sure if the question is asking about research methodology or actual nightlife practice, but I hope I've spoken a bit to both.
I think you have, yeah. And I think maybe if I could just read the next couple of questions, or the next question, and then come to the hand, which I think is from Stephen. So I'll come to you, Stephen. Before that, let's go to Duska, who's asked, found it very interesting to hear about the culturally inflected notions of drag. Could you say a bit more about the Bollywood disco lineage of the auntie? So I think you've covered that to a certain extent, but maybe just break it down for those who don't know the auntie in Bollywood.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was gesturing to the disco auntie, I'm thinking about my own aunties who were performing to disco, right? The kinds of ways that disco music is now auntie music is I think what I was gesturing to. But it's what my mom, it's what my mom and her friends were performing to, and they felt very cool and sexy, and those are the songs they still want me to play when they're hanging out and dancing, right? So that's how I'm thinking about that. But in Hindi cinema, there are all these auntie figures, liminal figures, who are the neighbor, the sister-in-law or the mother-in-law.
And there's the vile auntie in Sita or Gita, right?
Yeah.
The one who
Yeah.
administers the slap and is like really vile. So they're
Yeah.
either villainous or
They really are. Yeah. So the auntie is actually always quite villainous.
yeah.
And which is why it's so easy to queer her and like do something else with her, because that archetype is so fixed that when you do something new with that auntie figure, she transforms. The other place that the auntie exists very publicly and popularly is in soap operas. And so there's a famous line in the series Hum Panch where one of the older figures says, "Don't call me auntie," right? And it's become a very recurrent line because no one wants to be that figure. That figure is so concretized that no one wants to be it, and I'm sort of refusing the refusal as well. And I'm interested in people who refuse that refusal.
Great, thank you. The next question's from Bianca, who says, "Hi Kareem, I'm interested in knowing more about the relationship between Lahore as an alter ego and Kareem as the educator in the classroom. You mentioned that liminal space of recognition as well as distancing. How do you discuss your performance and the performativity of the self with them? How do they respond to that?"
So it's interesting. I don't go in there. I don't use Lahore in the classroom to get at gender performativity and performance. I actually use her to teach other things altogether. So I was teaching a Bollywood dance class, and on Gender and Sexuality Day, she shows up and she does all these dances that you watched, but the students, one of the students said, I know all these songs, I dance to them, but I didn't know how to watch them on your body. And I think that's one of the acts of defamiliarization, right? But the other is that when we were talking about interview methods and methodology, I show up for a feminist research methods class as Lahore, and I said, okay, we're going to do interviews, and one person is going to interview me, and this person didn't know how to talk to Lahore, right? Someone who talks to me regularly but wasn't sure how to ask her questions. And we had an opportunity to think about, well, what is it about the drag queen, the trans feminine figure that feels intimidating or feels not real, and why can't you interview a quote unquote not real person?
Yeah.
And then the other thing I do in terms of defamiliarization is simply to ask, oh, so what has the Dr. Khubchandani been teaching you in class? And suddenly they have to tell me what they've learned from my class, but not to me. And they will speak in third person about Kareem, like I'm not in the room, and they're talking to Lahore, and there's it's fun, right? And I think fun in the classroom is important, and it's an opportunity for them to play along, and I think that they really enjoy the opportunity for play in the classroom.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Stephen, who's had his hand up for a while, and then go to the rest of the chat. So Stephen, over to you.
Hi, Kareem. Thanks for your thanks for your paper and your talk. It's been very edifying and fueling as ever. I'm interested in when I was listening to your video and to some of the stuff you talked about this afternoon. It seems hanging around in this discourse is something about age and aging and understanding. Nighttime economies might be a bit exclusive for people as they get older. They might not be interested in how they might engage in their politics. Likewise, when you talked about, the juggernaut or the complex of RuPaul's Drag Race and how that has created generational conflicts in performance communities potentially, could you just reflect on age and aging in this kind of field?
Absolutely. That is absolutely at the center of thinking with aunties, and that the auntie is not just a figure, but is an embodiment of an entire generation, right? Especially when you watch these TikToks that are critiquing aunties, and there's so many that they just talk about aunties in general. Um, but there's a scene in Ishtael in which I talk about a mode of dance that sort of launches me back into dancing with my aunties and the kind of shame they produced in me in that dance moment, right? And so but I also talk about how productive that moment was in the nightclub. And so that's one of those other moments where I'm thinking about, sure, that was there's some generational tensions working for me at a younger age, but now I'm like, this is so good. I'm the auntie now, right? And again, I think there are some resources that aunties offer us, or older generations can offer, that I think we throw out because we're critical of their quote unquote outdated politics. So some of what I'm trying to do in the auntie book, even in the auntie TED talk, is to say all the things we dislike about aunties and about older generations and their sort of concretized understandings of gender, sexuality, pleasure, all of those things actually have other potentials if we look at them properly. If we look at them closely, they actually have tools that are useful to us. As we think about the nightclub, you know, and Andrew Paul, whose age I feel is at the center of much of the conflict. RuPaul has always been problematic. I think attributing it to her age is actually not what's going on here. But I think that's the easiest thing to do. But she's always been white aspirational. You know, she wants to be the glamazon. She has real discomfort with being the Black girl from the ghetto, right? Which is how she, you know, she talks about growing up in the projects, etc. But she really disavows it through performance. It's not a strategic one, and she's always been doing that. So I think you're calling attention to, if we use age as an analytic, right? We might look more closely at what has RuPaul been doing all along, and what is she doing now? And we see, I think, that we can't just attribute everything to, oh, she's stuck in a different kind of politics and a different kind of time. But in fact, even then, she was not the most radical performance figure, but was really interested in being around other white wealthy folks who continued to be her producers. You know, she's still collaborating with the exact same people. She hasn't brought any like fabulous new trans Black talent onto her production team. She sources her makeup artists from the very queens that she nurtures inside of her show. So I don't know. Age is not always the explanation for why people have bad politics. But I think that, especially in the figure of the auntie, that's why she's invoked so often, is that she's stuck in time. And yeah.
Thank you. Joe, I wonder, is it time, do you think, or can we squeeze in a last couple of questions, or do we have to go?
I think we're probably just about at time. We are at 29 minutes past. So yeah, I think we probably have to wrap up. I will save the chat, everybody, and give you access to that. I can send it to you too, Kareem, if you'd like, so that you have a record of those questions too.
Absolutely. So sorry, I think Roberta and Anna Laura, you had a question, and I don't think we had any more, but everyone's thanking you, Kareem, for your fabulous keynote lecture and conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. and for giving
Thank
us your
you.
precious time. And I hope you can come back to Britain soon. And good luck with all your projects and more later.
Thank you. This has
Ciao,
been great.
everyone.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks. Bye.